You'll remember from a couple of weeks ago, Dan talked about these rough 500-year periods. So back from Jesus, there are about 500 years where the priests were in charge. The 500 years before that, we had the kings in charge, where we had the prophets prophesying to the different nations, the divided kingdom, remember? Before we had the kings in charge, there were about 500 years where the judges were in charge. And before that, it takes us about 500 years back to the patriarchs. But what is a patriarch? Well, a patriarch is a little bit like saying the original or the founding person of a thing. So, for example, I've got an example for you. Anthony in the Wiggles was a patriarch of the Wiggles. He was a founding Wiggle, if you like. So you could say he was one of the original Wiggles. So he could be called a patriarch of the Wiggles. Now, you'll remember from our story today that Sarah and Abraham, and she comes down here. Here we go. Here's Sarah. You read about her in the book of Genesis, remember? So she's still in the book of Genesis. Sarah and Abraham were the patriarch for Abraham and the matriarch, a bit like mum and dad, the patriarch and the matriarch of the Christian faith, because God promised them that from their descendants they would have so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-great-greats, all the greats, children, that their descendants would outnumber the stars. But God asked them to go from everything they knew. He asked them to do the seemingly impossible and just to trust his word. He even told Sarah that she was going to have this baby when she was like 90 years old, and that is just crazy. It seems impossible. Now, I don't know if you've ever had to do anything that's impossible, but I asked Dan to help me out with a little something earlier. So let's just take a look at that. Okay, so sometimes it can be really hard to trust God when things seem impossible. Now, we've got a bucket of water here, and I've asked Dan to help me out because I want him to put the bucket of water over his head. So I'd like you to do that if that's okay.
But I'll get really wet.
Well, this is why I asked Dan to help. But just trust me. I just want you to put the bucket of water over your head and not get wet. Okay? Will you trust me? Even though it seems impossible, I'd like you to just trust me. I'm going to stand over to the side though because I don't actually want to get wet. So I'd like you to
and I'm not going to get wet.
You won't get wet. I promise.
Oh wow! Look.
Look at that.
I'm still dry.
He's still dry. Did you want to just double check that we had water in here? Yeah? You want me to show you? Shall I show you? Okay. So there was water in the bucket, and he was able to turn it over his head upside down, and he didn't get wet. Well, until that point. I don't know what you thought about that, but I quite enjoyed throwing water over Dan. But he had to trust me with something that seemed impossible, turning a bucket of water upside down over his head and trusting that the water wouldn't come out. Well, it seems impossible, right? Maybe you should try it at home with like some soft teddies in the bottom of a bucket or something like that and see if the teddies stay in the bucket or not. Have a play around, see what you think. But sometimes God asks us to do things that seem impossible, and we have to trust him. So as you look into your packs this morning and you explore a little bit more about Sarah's story, have a think, were there any other people in the Bible that at first doubted what God said and then came round to a place of trusting him? Have a think about your own life. Are there situations where you doubt the truth of God's word? Or are you holding firm and trusting that what he says is true and that you are holding firm to his promises? So you guys have a little investigation with Sarah now, and the rest of us are going to be heading to Jono, who is starting a new series for us called I Believe.